Hello, my name is Erin Payton, and I am the Executive Director of the 19th Century Charitable Association, which is based in Oak Park, Illinois. Welcome to the first collaboration between Writing Matters and the 19th Century Charitable Association. While everyone starts to pop in, I'm just going to give you a little information of how the program will go. We really hope you enjoyed this program. If you have any questions or comments for Elizabeth or Douglas, you can leave them in the Q&A or in the comment field, and we will get to as many as we can at the end of the program. We want to welcome everybody who are here from not only Oak Park in Illinois, but all over the world for this program. It's really exciting. And now I am going to welcome Bill Young from Writing Matters.
I'm Bill Young. Writing Matters was started by Elizabeth Berg a number of years ago as an attempt to help writers get the recognition they deserve. The events were held at the Hemingway Museum and included food and beverage, a printed program, and a musical soundtrack compiled by the late Val Camilletti, who, if there was a book of 1,001 people you should meet, would have been included. We also included a few surprises like a fortune teller or a live owl. Now Writing Matters is being resurrected as a collaboration with the 19th Century Club in Oak Park. It's a wonderful and elegant new home, but it will have to be imagined virtually for the time being. I've never met Douglas Stuart, but he and Shuggie Bain have lived in my house for the past 2 months. I've known Elizabeth for 25 years and have never seen her so enraptured by a book. Douglas was born and raised in Glasgow and graduated with an MA from the Royal College of the Arts in London. In 2000, he moved to New York City and began a career as a fashion designer. Shuggie Bain, about a little boy growing up in the 1980s, is his first novel, and I'm happy to tell you that it's been longlisted for this year's Booker Prize for the best book of the year. Elizabeth Berg is the New York Times bestselling author of more than 30 books, most recently the Arthur trilogy, which is the story of Arthur Truelove, Night of Miracles and the Confession Club, set in small-town Mesa, Missouri. A memoir about her parents, I'll Be Seeing You, will be published in October. It is with great pleasure that I welcome Douglas Stuart and Elizabeth Berg.
Thank you to Douglas Stuart for coming. I am so honored that you are taking the time. Thank you as well to every single person who's watching this or will watch it. I think it's really important that we spread the word about beautiful books, and I'm happy to do my small part. I wanted to let you know about the format. I'm going to talk a little bit, and then there's going to be a brief reading. And feel free to close your eyes and listen because it's so beautiful. When I read this book, I would read lines out loud. It took me a long time to read it because I kept stopping to reread and reread. And then we're going to have questions, mine and yours. So Shuggie Bain does take place in the 80s, as you heard. Shuggie is 5 when it opens, right, Douglas? He's 5, and he's 16 when the book ends. When he's 5, his philandering father brings the family to a desolate public housing area outside of Glasgow, and then proceeds to abandon Shuggie, his brother, his sister, and his alcoholic mother, who is described in a review as glamorous and calamitous. Calamitous is an understatement. Probably glamorous is too. It ends, as I said, when Shuggie is 16 and living on his own in a bedsit with thin walls and with a bathroom that might also be called calamitous. It's a sad book, but it is also laugh out loud funny. Is it brutal in its honesty? Yes, but it is also exquisitely tender. The characters are richly and compassionately drawn. As I told you, the dialogue is just fantastic. And the lyrical writing is one of the reasons that the awards are starting to pile on. Here's an example, just a small example of what critics have said about this novel. Think D.H. Lawrence, think James Joyce, a literary tour de force. Reads like an instant classic. Scene by scene, this book is a masterpiece. Stuart shows a lot of monstrous behavior, but not a single monster. If he has a sharp eye for brokenness, he is even keener on the inextinguishable flicker of love that remains. Still, when we all are enduring such awful times, why should we read a sad book? Why not reach for something light and happy? Maybe because those light and happy books are like empty calories. They may feel good for the moment, but they don't last. And they don't help us learn how to deal with despair. One thing this book does is serve as guidance for how to get through really hard times that seem to go on forever and land on the side of compassion, hope, and even joy. I want to welcome Douglas Stuart again, and I want to invite you to do the first reading. And everybody close your eyes.
Elizabeth, thank you so much. I mean, you actually almost made me cry a little bit there. That's the loveliest thing I've ever heard. Thank you. Part of what I would love to read for you now from Shuggie Bain is actually from chapter 2. It is the section where we first meet the main character, Agnes. Agnes is the proud working class mother of the Bain family. And we see her here actually living in some of the public housing in the city, in the Sighthouse tower blocks, which are now actually torn down. And she is chafing at the smallness of her life. This is where we meet Agnes. Agnes Bain pushed her toes into the carpet and leaned out as far as she could into the night air. The damp wind kissed her flushed neck and pushed down inside her dress. It felt like a stranger's hand, a sign of living, a reminder of life. With a flick, she watched her cigarette dout fall, the glowing embers dancing 16 floors down onto the dark forecourt. She wanted to show the city this claret velvet dress. She wanted to feel a little envy from strangers, to dance with men who held her proud and close. Mostly, she wanted to take a good drink, to live a little. With a stretch of her calves, she leaned her hip bone on the window frame and let go of the ballast of her toes. Her body tipped down towards the amber city lights and her cheeks flushed with blood. She reached her arms out to the lights, and for a brief moment she was flying, but no one noticed the flying woman. She thought about tilting further then, dared herself to do it, how easy it would be to kid herself that she was flying until it became only falling, and she broke herself on the concrete below. The high-rise flat she still shared with her mother and father pressed in against her. Everything in the room behind her felt so small, so low-ceilinged and stifling, a payday to mass day, a life bought on tick, with nothing that ever felt owned outright. To be 39 and have her husband and their 3 children all crammed together in her mammy's flat gave her a feeling of failure. Him, her man, who when he shared her bed now seemed to lie on the very edge, made her feel angry with the littered promises of better things. Agnes wanted to put her foot through it all, or to scrape it back like it was spoilt wallpaper, to get her nail underneath it and rip it all away.
You know, I've read this book twice. I read it twice in part because I wanted to be a good interviewer. I'm kind of nervous being on the other side this way. But it was such a pleasure. And when I heard you read that again now, I want to read it a third time. Oh, thank you. Man, there's not a bad sentence in this book. Okay, now we're going to get to the tough questions. Are you ready?
All right.
Okay. So it often happens that a first novel is highly autobiographical. Would you say that that was true for you?
Yes, I think I have to confess it. I will say it is a work of fiction, Elizabeth, and so I wouldn't want anyone to read it and think that it was really truly based on my life. But I am a queer son of a single mother who lost her own battle with addiction. My mother died when I was in school, in high school, and so I write often about sort of what it means to be queer in a post-industrial landscape, what it means to love an alcoholic, what it means to sort of struggle under the patriarchy from the inside in that way. And also, we were incredibly poor. We were raised on what Americans would call welfare. We were raised on government benefits, and we were given a little bit on a Monday and a little bit on a Tuesday. And so when I write about poverty, and I write a lot about poverty in this book, I write about it having grown up inside it.
Thank you. It took you 12 years to complete this novel, yes?
Yes.
Can you tell us what motivated you to start writing it? And do you remember the day when you sat down with some sort of conviction to start writing a novel? And the third question, this is a lot, I know for one, the third part of this is, I cried reading this, especially at the end. Did you cry when you wrote it?
Let me answer the last part first. Yeah, I did. I did cry frequently when I wrote it. I actually, overall, I found the book incredibly healing to write. I found the publishing of it much more traumatic, the sort of sharing it and the exposure of that to be much more traumatic. But the book did make me cry also. The characters are fictional, but certainly I understand what it means to love a mother who loses her own struggle, and I understand, and so it brought back a lot of trauma for me in that way. When I sat down to write the book, you're right in the sense that it took me 12 years to write it. Growing up in sort of an area of deprivation in Glasgow, I'd always wanted to be a writer as a kid, Elizabeth, but it was just not seen as something that boys like me should do. I come from a long line of tradesmen, slaters and shipbuilders and joiners, but books were always seen, I didn't have any books in the house growing up, and books were always seen as a very feminine thing. They contain a lot of other worlds, they contain feelings, and so they were just a very sort of dangerous thing for boys to have. I mean, it would possibly end in violence for me as a kid if I'd have been seen sort of with my nose in books. And so I went into the trade of textiles, which is a very Scottish thing, and that's what ultimately brought me to New York. But I always had furloughed dreams of being a writer and of writing. And so I sat down 12 years ago just to write in private for myself what became Shuggie Bain. At the beginning, I sat and I wrote it out of chronological order. It kind of burst to get out of me. But at the same time, I didn't ever approach it with any expectations that it would actually be a book. Never mind that anybody would ever read it, never mind that it would ever make the Booker list. I wrote it, I think it took me 12 years because I was working and making my living and my earning in another field, but also because I loved it. It's the thing I've done in my life that I have loved the most, spending time with these characters and writing this book. And so writing for 12 years was actually an enormous pleasure for me. Some days I would only be able to write before I went to work. Some days I would have to scribble some lines when I was on the subway. I was stuck in the Hong Kong airport more times than you can imagine, but that was great because I could sit and I could write there. And that's how the book sort of came together. But it took me many years to sort of sit down and look at the book and think to myself, oh my gosh, this is going to be a book. For me, it was just writing. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that answers it, but.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So I think you have answered this question, but just in case you wanted to add anything else to it, I wanted to ask you what you got out of writing it and what you hope any reader will get out of it, or what some readers at least.
I think personally what I got out of writing it is I got an awful lot of healing. I think I also internalized an awful lot of inferiority complexes, being a poor working class kid, never really feeling that English and literature was quite for me, Elizabeth. And so in writing a book and then sitting down and working on that, I've proven a lot of things to myself. And I think there was a lot of healing there for me as well. you know, it's not a meek book, and it looks at life, and it looks at real life, actually. And sometimes we have a difficult time looking at people who are struggling with poverty, people who are struggling with addiction, especially when it's a woman, I think. And certainly growing up myself, I know firsthand how the world turns away from mothers who are struggling, and how they don't quite like to look at it. We almost forgive men when they're struggling. They can be seen to be a rascal, or they can be seen to just be a good time. But when women fail on that level, it becomes an incredibly isolating place. And so I knew my own mother as being incredibly isolated, and then I knew my own experience as being a gay boy, or a young effeminate boy growing up in this very hard man's world, as being a very isolating place. But all I wanted readers to get from it is that it was written in honesty and written in truth. And I think art should move us. I think what you said at the beginning was absolutely true. You know, it's great to enjoy books. It's great to be sort of find happy stories, but books that always stick with me in my life are the books that haunt me in a way. And so I wanted to write this very sort of truthful story, this portrait of this family, and hopefully have the characters stay within the reader's heart.
Oh, they will. I was struck, you talked about insecurities, and I was struck reading your fantastic story in the New Yorker. It's called Found Wanting. And there's one detail in there that I just can't stop thinking about. And it is the scene where a character comes out of the shower but won't use a towel to dry off because it's too nice.
Yeah.
It was just one of those zinger details. So again, along the lines of insecurities and vulnerabilities, I think that when you are raised with a neglectful or abusive parent, that's in the mix, it must be. But I wondered too, if children of neglectful parents can end up with certain strengths or positive traits like you seem to have done, compassion and awareness. I wondered what your take is on that.
Yeah, you know, I think my experience with addiction and alcoholism is that the person is an entire person. And so let's talk about the character of Agnes. Agnes within the book, as the mother of 3 children, is smart, she's funny, she has small ambitions, but she's ambitious, she's gregarious. She is definitely sort of, you know, governed by her wants and her small wants. She's quite exhaustive. She's beautiful. But then on top of it, you know, her addiction is a condition she's suffering through. It's not her personality. It is really something that she is sort of suffering through. And so when I sat down to write the book, I wanted to make sure I was writing about an entire person, not just that her alcoholism was her personality or the condition was her. She is a full person. She is a woman, she's a mother, she's a lover, and she wants to be loved, and she wants to have her small needs met. She wants to be able to buy clothes for her children that she doesn't have to put on a layaway plan. She wants a home with its own front door instead of living with her own mother and father at 39. She wants all of these she wants a night out. She wants to go see the lights in Blackpool, which is like the British Atlantic City. And so she just wants these small things. So she's an entire person. And so the compassion in the book, I think, is first of all by treating the characters like that. Even Shuggie, as a young boy, a lot of people ask me about, well, he's gay, and you're very subtle with the gayness. And I think to myself, actually, that's just a facet of what this boy is. This boy is resilient. He is precocious. He's fussy. He isolates himself by his own sort of overstated sense of manners. And he's a whole kid. But when you do love an alcoholic parent, and when Shuggie loves an alcoholic parent, it's such an inversion of the parent-child relationship, Elizabeth. Instantly within the book, Shuggie is the caregiver. He's looking after the family money. He's making sure his mother doesn't sort of fall to any harm, either inside the house or outside of it. And he doesn't really have any sort of respite from that. And so when you look at these two sort of souls together, it is just a relationship of compassion, I think. And so it's easy to show brutal things when you sort of show it next to enormous love, I hope. You know,
Yeah.
it's the balance. That's life.
That's life. And you did that so well with every character. Even a character I wanted to hate, I couldn't hate. I couldn't. Everyone, even what's her name? Ginty?
Yeah.
These characters are so fully realized and so shown that you can't help liking them.
Yeah. You know, I think an important thing is Glasgow is a vibrant, beautiful city, like American cities. I think of it often like Philadelphia or Detroit, because it's a hugely industrial city, meaning a huge amount of the population was involved in sort of working class heavy manufacturing, whether that was shipbuilding, coal, steel, railway cars, or automobile manufacturing. And in the 80s, or in the 70s actually, starting under Thatcher's rule, she essentially stopped them being public businesses and privatized them, which just put everyone out of work. Unemployment under Margaret Thatcher in the UK skyrocketed to 14%, but in Glasgow it went to 28%. And it affected the working classes profoundly. And so what really the book is about people, good and bad people, and just people. They're not good people or they're not bad people. They're just people suffering through a bad time and doing whatever it is. The oldest story in the world is you will do whatever it is to survive. And that's really what we see.
Is that in keeping with another reading that you have prepared for us?
Yeah, if you would like to know a little bit more about Glasgow, I would love to read you from Shug. We've heard from Agnes. And so now this part is actually from Shug, who is the man she has married. Agnes is a Catholic woman, and Glasgow is a city that has a lot of sectarianism, meaning divides between Catholics and Protestants. It's a staunchly Protestant city, but with all the Catholic immigration, it has a very sort of robust Catholic population. Shug is probably quite a bad man. Philandering is too nice of a word to what he does to women. I think he uses them and he abuses them. But Agnes is married to him, and Shug is about to devastate her in the worst way. This is Shug actually as a taxi driver going around the city, and this gives you a glimpse of Glasgow. That summer, when it finally came, was close and damp. For a nocturnal man, the days had felt too long. The long daylight was like an inconsiderate guest, the northern gloam reluctant to leave. Big Shug always found the summer days hardest to sleep through. The sun brightened the thick curtains till they were a vibrating violet, and the children were always noisiest when they were happiest. The door was constantly going, with mouthy teenagers from other flats and women in strappy sandals traipsing the hall carpet, clacking pink feet and pink gums at all hours. As the night finally fell, Big Shug pulled his black hackney round in a small tight circle. It spun like a fat dog chasing its tail and headed out of the Sighthill estate. Seeing the lights of Glasgow, he relaxed back into the seat, and for the first time that day, his shoulders fell from around his ears. For the next 8 hours, the city was his, and he had plans for it. Shug wiped the window and got a good look in the wing mirror. Smiling to himself, he thought how smashing he looked. White shirt, black suit, black tie. It was a bit much for work, Agnes had said, but then she said altogether too much these days. As the smile travelled through his body, he wondered whether taxi driving was in his blood. Between him and his brother Rascal, it was practically a family business. His father would have enjoyed it too, had the shipbuilding not killed him. Shug pulled up at the lights under the shadow of the Royal Infirmary and watched a gaggle of nurses smoke a crafty fag. He watched them rub their pink skin in the cold night air and shelf their tits over tight folded arms. They smoked without using their hands, afeard of losing any body heat. He smiled slowly and watched himself react in the mirror. Night shift definitely suited him best. He liked to roam alone in the darkness, getting a good look at the underbelly. Out came the characters shellacked by the grey city, years of drink and rain and hope holding them in place. His living was made by moving people, but his favourite pastime was watching them. The thin driver's window made a sharp slicing sound as he slid it down and lit a cigarette. The wind came rushing in, and his long strands of thin hair danced like beach grass in the breeze. He hated going bald. He hated getting old. It made everything hard work. He adjusted the mirror lower so that he couldn't see the reflection of his bare head. He found his long, thick moustache and sat absent-mindedly stroking it like a favourite pet. Under it, his spare chin wobbled. He tilted the mirror back up. The Glasgow streets were shiny with rain and streetlights. The infirmary nurses didn't linger, flicking half-smoked fags into puddles and tottering back inside. Shug sighed and turned the taxi past Town Head and pointed down towards the city centre. He liked the drive from Sighthill. It was like a descent into the heart of the Victorian darkness. The closer you got to the river, the lowest part of the city, the more the real Glasgow opened up to you. There were hidden nightclubs tucked under shadowy railway arches and blacked-out windowless pubs where old men and women sat on sunny days in sweaty, pungent purgatory. It was down near the river that skinny, nervous-faced women sold themselves to men in polished estate cars. And sometimes it was here that the police would later find chopped up bits of them in black bin bags. The north bank of the Clyde housed the city mortuary, and it seemed fitting that all the lost souls were floating in that direction so as to be no trouble when their time blessedly came.
Oh my goodness.
Sorry, that was a bit of a dark section.
No, you're so modest, but I'm going to ask you this anyway. Did you know when you were writing this how very good it was? Did you get little writer thrills and chills?
You know, I didn't, Elizabeth, and it is actually truly the first thing that I wrote. But like I said, I created a very protective space around it, and I think it was maybe about 3 years. My husband knew what I was doing or what I was trying to do, but it was about 3 years till I let anyone read it, and it was him who read it first. And when he read it, I sort of saw how he was struck by it, and he had no idea that this was in me or this story. Nor actually, just as an anecdote, did he realize how poor I'd been as a kid. I think, you know, something about men and these kind of things is we have a tough time, certainly west coast of Scotland men. We're taught never to expect ourselves to be exceptional, never exceptionally great, nor exceptionally hard done to. And I think that's just a socialist statement, because obviously our fathers were all union men, we were all the same, we all grew up in houses that were identical. And so exceptionalism is a thing that you're punished for in a way, or thinking you're exceptional. And so the book did a lot for my husband as well, just in understanding sort of how I grew up. Obviously not having any parents, he didn't have any personal connection to actual humans. And so it sort of illuminated what the city had been like for me.
Speaking of your husband, I understand that he went through the manuscript and went, nah, you can lose that, you can lose that. So my friend Phyllis Florin, who actually designed your poster, wants to know what was on those pages.
Actually, the first draft, Shuggie, is about 450 pages double-spaced. But the first draft of the manuscript was 900 pages single-spaced.
Oh, wow.
And so it was just overwhelming. I mean, It was a Nausgard novel, it was a trilogy, I don't know. But for every one of the characters, even the despicable characters within the book, I was so fascinated by what might happen to them, how they had arrived there, where they had come from, that I just wanted to spend time with them. And because I had no dreams for the book about it being published, I could do that. And so I wrote everything that came to me. And when I handed it to him, it was 2 ring binders, really big legal binders. And I said, would you read this? And he was, at the beginning, he was like making very, very thoughtful notes. And then by about page 400, he was like, no. And then like, man, and just like a big red pen. And he was like, stop telling me this. And so it was, it tested our marriage, but.
Well, he was probably a good editor. I wanted to ask you if you're getting conceited now, or if you, like most writers, are still full of self-loathing.
I am absolutely loathing. Yeah, no, it's not getting to me at all. I'm absolutely full of self-loathing. In fact, it's just, yeah, that's it. I'm actually naturally quite a shy person.
Enough said. You worked for a while in the fashion industry. Did you ever meet Tim Gunn?
You know, I never did meet Tim Gunn, but you're right, I did. I worked in fashion. I'm actually a knitwear designer, which is a super Scottish thing to be, I think. We've got such a history in textiles. But that took me, and I've worked in New York for 20 years at collection level with Calvin Klein and Ralph Lauren. So I have met the actual Calvin Klein, the actual Ralph Lauren, and had them yell at me both, if that makes you feel better. And then I spent 15 years at the Gap, and then lastly at Kate Spade. And so that's really sort of my career. But I found working actually at the Gap was the best thing for me. The collection level was difficult because it was luxury clothes, and the encouragement was always to make it more expensive and as out of reach of people as it could almost be. And as a kid that was grown up where everything my mother ever bought me was bought on layaway or bought on a catalogue, or I saw how she struggled, I actually had a really tough time with it. And so the Gap I loved because it was incredibly democratic. I'm probably in your closet, Elizabeth, quite honestly. And so I just loved it there. And so I was there for 15 years. But I never met Tim Gunn.
Okay. That was just a little light question to throw in there. Do you have something of your mother's now still that you hold dear?
I think I don't have anything personal of my mother's. We actually didn't have a lot of photographs as a kid, but my mother, and I didn't realize it until I was talking to the Times in London last week, my mother has given me I didn't think my mother taught me anything because my mother, although a beautiful woman, was very unwell by the time by my first memories. But actually it was my mother that taught me to knit. And then in writing, something I used to do with my mum an awful lot when she was drinking and I wanted to sort of hold her in place and just keep her safe, is I would sit at her feet with just an old school book, and I'd maybe be 7 or 8, and I would pretend to write her biography, her autobiography, as she sort of dictated it to me. And it was a really powerful thing as my mother drank, and to keep her attention on me. And we never really often got past the dedication at the front of the book, but it was a good thing. And in a funny way, that was also a great way for her to impart a lot of stories with me. I was raised by women, not only my mother, but obviously being an alcoholic and being part of Alcoholics Anonymous meant a lot of the women who came to the house were also struggling. And then being the son of a single mother meant my entire universe was often other single mothers and their children. And that was a wonderful place for a young boy to be, because women talk more than men. The men in my life never ever spoke or said anything. And so it was just a wonderfully rich place to absorb stories. And I probably learned things young boys shouldn't, and saw things young boys shouldn't, but that was my universe.
You know, 2 things. One is, I wonder if you could share with the people listening what that dedication was. And the other thing is, with regard to the men not speaking, there is one man in Agnes's life who speaks quite eloquently, and that was my request for a scene to be read. So could you answer the dedication question and then read the 3rd reading?
Yeah, absolutely. My own mother always felt spurned by love and jilted. She was married twice, only twice, but she always felt like she'd been incredibly unlucky in love. And she always looked at Elizabeth Taylor as a little bit of an icon for her, herself personally. And so the dedication was always to Elizabeth Taylor, who knows nothing about love. And like, it's such a grand, for this sort of woman living on government benefits in Glasgow to like come out with this grand announcement of and me 7 writing this. And then we would get to like the first chapter and it wouldn't flow much further than that. Was such a grand pronouncement that it's always stuck with me. But the section I would like to read to you now, I don't know how many of our readers have read the book already, but Agnes, after struggling with her addiction for most of the book, actually becomes sober and, you know, enjoys quite a long period of sobriety. And after being sort of really ruthlessly abandoned by her husband, Shug, who in essence goes off in search of a more peaceful woman because he finds Agnes's wants and addictions quite exhausting. She meets a really handsome, good Catholic man called Eugene, who also turns out to be a taxi driver. But Eugene turns out to be the brother of a woman who lives in the housing estate with Agnes and who is really the largest antagonist of Agnes. Colleen McAvenny is really infected by the misogyny that comes through the chapel and sees Agnes as not acting how a mother and how a woman should be. She can see quite clearly through the thin veneer of pride that the character of Agnes has. And Agnes has gone on her first date with Eugene, and she has just discovered that he is Colleen's brother. Last thing, just to set it up, is actually they're at a place called the Grand Old Opry, which is an actual club in Glasgow. And Glasgow, for anyone that doesn't know, absolutely loves country and western and gunslingers and that sort of mythology of American history. And it has this amazing nightclub called the Grand Old Opry. This is a quick reading, but they're on the dance floor, and Agnes has just discovered that Eugene is Colleen's brother. Agnes shrank back into herself, and cold air filled the spaces where she had pressed her body against his. The band played a new song, a sad, broken-hearted tune, one that made women dance with other women and sing along. So how long have you been after drink? Maybe you should ask your Colleen. It was Eugene's turn to stiffen. Is it hard, not drinking? He asked earnestly. Yes, and it gets harder, not easier. How come? Well, you get a little bit stronger every day, but the drink is always there waiting. It doesn't matter if you walk or run away from it. It's still just right behind you, like a shadow. The trick is not to forget. Forget what? All sorts of things, she sighed. How weak you are, how bad you were on the drink. You think sometimes that you can control it, that you'll have mastered it. I bet you mastered it, he said plainly. She looked up at him. That's why going to meetings is important. You'll never master it. Well, I hope my drinking doesn't bother you. It took her a moment. No. Does it? Oh, no. I just wish I could have one with you to feel normal. Oh, you look normal enough to me. He had answered so plainly, so quickly that it struck her. Believe it or not, that's one of the nicest things I've heard in a long time. They danced on, and she tried to feel better. She tried to cut off her doubt and her shame and let the daydreams from earlier reignite. He could be the one to help dig her out of her emptiness, a friend, a lover, a father. She could keep him clean and fed. She would keep herself neat. He could give her money. They could have holidays. He would buy her messages in a big trolley from a big name brand supermarket. She would love him. This was how her daydreams ran. The spaces of cold air were closing between their bodies again when something inside her pushed her to ask. If Colleen told you that I am such a disgrace, why did you come tonight? He didn't answer for a while. The weight made her embarrassed, and when he did answer, it was clear he had thought about it before. I've been lonely for years now, lonely long before my wife died. Don't get us wrong, she was a good woman just like our Colleen, but we were just stuck in our wee routine. The music didn't match the soft sadness of his words. When you think about it, I've been under the ground most of my life. There wasn't much in me for sharing at the end of the day. After 20 years, what do you talk about? But she was a good woman. She used to make me these big hot dinners with meat and gravy and a plate scalding hot because she kept it warm in the oven all day. We ate big hot dinners because we had nothing left to say. Nothing worthwhile anyway. He went on. I'm 43. That's 40 years older than when my own father died, so I should have been done. I should have been retiring from the pits, living the rest of my days out with her with nothing to say. Agnes heard his throat catch. When I saw you, I wasn't looking. I didn't know of you then. Hadn't even heard our Colleen lift your name. That's woman's stuff, isn't it? They don't talk to men about that. Gossip, telling tales, chapel. That's their club. All I know is when I saw you sat behind glass, I saw somebody lonely too, and I hoped we might have something to say to each other. I realised then, I don't want to be done.
Oh. Please don't let it be another 12 years before your next novel. You are working on the next novel, right?
I am. I'm writing a love story about two teenage boys who are divided by sectarian gang territorial lines. And I have good news to share about that, Elizabeth. I think you'll hear about that pretty soon.
Okay. Good.
Actually,
I'm glad. Well, I know that there must be some questions from the audience. I just want to thank you again for coming and taking the time to talk to us, but most of all for writing the most beautiful, beautiful book I've read in maybe forever. I can't say enough about it. Sometimes when you love a book so much and you push it so hard on people, they run screaming the other way. And I think all that anyone has to do is listen to those readings to be convinced. So thank you very much. I want to make sure that, oh, I have one last question about Agnes.
yes.
And you gave a quite beautiful recitation of what she wants.
Hmm.
And I thought about what she wanted when I was reading the book. And it occurred to me that, like a lot of women, she sought the things that she wanted through men. And that she was such a glorious character, and she had her own gifts and talents and abilities.
Yeah.
And it made me wonder if she could have really had what she wanted, would it have involved men?
That is actually, I'm so grateful for that question. I think that's the most beautiful question, Elizabeth. The character of Agnes would have come of age in the 50s in Glasgow, in a working class city where, as a young woman, certainly she would have been encouraged to go out and get work, go out and get sort of labor work, sort of, you know, looking for a paycheck every Friday. She wouldn't have progressed in her own education. It just wouldn't have been seen as something, A, that would have been for her, or necessarily that she would have had to have done, because she could have had a good life just working. She wouldn't have had the ability to have explored her sexuality without the harsh judgment. And you'll see in the book that her mother at the beginning of the book is actually quite a harsh critic of Agnes, of her wants and of how she expresses herself. She sees her alcoholism as just a weakness of the spirit almost. And Agnes should just snap out of it and sort herself out and get herself to the chapel. And so Agnes would have wanted to, like all the women I knew, would have wanted to marry quite young because it would have given her independence. It would have given her some access to her sexuality and some way to have a house of her own. Also, you know, the book is really about how poverty limits options, and how when you are in that sort of position, you're not really left with many options. The council gives you a house. Nobody in the book owns their own house. They're giving a house by the government. If you want a larger house in a better neighborhood, you have more children, you're moved to that, or you go on a wait list and you're moved to that. And so Agnes really as a character is not a woman with a lot of options. And so when the men she invests in fail her or fail themselves or are not enough for her, as her first husband isn't, she just finds him dull, even though he is providing well for the family and loves her dearly. She just finds him boring. But when her second husband abandons her, it really leaves her with not a lot of options in life. And it is true, she could go out and get a job and work, but as a single mother of three, that's even a limited thing for her, because who would look after her children and where would they go and who would look after Shuggie? And so that's really when you start to see the things she had hoped for better for life, for nicer things. And I think also being a beautiful woman, she'd expected that almost. And when it doesn't start to come, her sort of descent into addiction accelerates.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
All right, so I guess we'll turn it over to questions from the audience.
I'm going to do something really cool. So we are going to actually hear from the audience themselves to pose a question. So they can ask you personally the question they have. But first, I just want to say a quick comment from Jane Chapman. She says, "I'm so grateful I got to attend this event. I love the book so much."
Oh, thank you, Jane.
I think that's probably a good general consensus from everybody who is here. So I thought I'd let her speak for everybody. But now I am going to go to Joanne Padley.
Yes, however, I think Douglas already answered it, but I'll ask it again.
Please.
First of all, Douglas, I just wanted to tell you how much I enjoyed the book. I'm halfway through it. I'm reading it slowly. as Elizabeth said, it's very much a book to be savored. I don't want to rush it, so I'm about halfway through and loving every word of it. You had me from page 1. My question was, but you've already answered, I wondered if you were working on another book, and if so, what we could expect that book to be, what the storyline might be. But,
yeah, well, I can expand on. Thank you. First of all, thank you, Joanne. That's a great question, and thank you for taking Shuggie and Agnes into your heart. That means a lot. I am working on another book. I don't want to spoil the end of the book for you, but I was left by the time I finished Shuggie with a lot of questions about sort of what kind of man would a boy like Shuggie become? What could he expect? And for my story in the New Yorker, that was really about sort of looking to find love in a city that didn't have a lot of gay people or didn't have a sort of community in that way. It was all about sort of a boy that answers personal ads. And so I was just fascinated to write a story that actually my editor said to me the other day sounds like Romeo and Juliet meets gang warfare. And I think that sort of like sums it up quite well. So it's about these two really, really sweet, gentle boys in quite a violent man's world who are trying to find the space to love each other. And I'm hoping it's going to be out in 2022.
We are too. Okay, Ron Block.
Hello, Elizabeth. Hello, Douglas.
Hi, Ron.
I want to know what writers and books have influenced you and your writing, because it's so soulful and beautiful.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so many things have influenced me. Funnily enough, Ron, like I said to Elizabeth, as a kid, I didn't read any books because it was we just didn't. I went to school in an area where 300 kids started and 12 finished for high school. And just because they were having so many, they just couldn't meet their human needs on the outside. It was such an area of deprivation. So I actually came to books as a man, because that was about the time I found the peace within myself and the peace in my environment around me in order to focus. But a huge influence on me is Thomas Hardy. I think probably the first sort of set of books that I read that really had an impact on me. And I think chief amongst it, both Tess and Jude the Obscure. Shuggie is in conversation with a lot of other Scottish writers. And so I'm hugely influenced by a writer called Agnes Owens, who was truly a working class writer. She was a mother of 7. And funnily enough, she was Billy Connolly's cleaning lady, is what she did for a living. But she wrote a really beautiful book called Gentlemen of the West, which was about a young man and his relationship with his mother, although the man is 20 and the mother is very cantankerous. But that's a beautiful book. But they've had enormous influences on me. And from there, you know, I'm a huge fan of Toni Morrison. I think I'm a fan of any book that sort of allows you to immerse yourself in it fully. When I pick up a book, I want to really be taken into the world, and I want it almost to feel like a world or maybe a time that I can't access if I'm not in the book. And so that's what I'm always looking for. And Toni Morrison does that for me. Cormac McCarthy, Alan Hollinghurst is a huge influence. Hollinghurst's books are almost in conversation with Shuggie as well, because they show the people that flourished under the Thatcher government. You know, it's all very sort of prosperity and money, and whereas Shuggie is the other sort of darker side of that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You know what? I'm going to go ahead and read your question list because you're a little garbled. So I'm going to do my best impression of you. Number 1 was, what made you decide to write a novel rather than a memoir? And number 2, so this is a 2-parter, when you write a novel that is based on a number of your experiences, how do you decide what to include and what not to include? And how do you decide what to present quite similar to your experiences and what to modify in important ways?
Yeah, those are great questions. Thank you, Liz. And I'm sorry, we're having a thunderstorm in New York, so if you hear that clattering, that's what it is. You know, I'm not quite sure why I wrote a memoir and a novel. I think what happened was as soon as the characters hit the page, their own experience and their own life started to eclipse my understanding of anything. And it suddenly, as a human being on the planet, I was suddenly dwarfed by this world. I also wanted not to be so myopic on the focus that everything came from the young boy's point of view, or from Shuggie's point of view, because not only is it a portrait of Agnes, and there's a good argument that says the book should be called Agnes Bain, and I'm okay with that argument, but actually it's quite a panoramic view of the city in a way, meaning I wanted to show that it's not just this one family that are doing what they can to survive. We see the character of Leanne, we see the character of Annie, even the McAvenis, everyone. It's really quite a panoramic book. And that really quickly dwarfs whatever my own singular perspective could ever have been. And then I think there's the question of trauma. I think, as I said earlier, it's a tough thing sometimes for men to discuss their traumas, and it's a tough thing certainly to put that on the page. And I just never had the compulsion to do it, to write it as a memoir, because I wanted to keep my sort of own thing, my own thing, and then give the world these characters.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We have a couple more questions.
Yeah.
Meg McCarthy, we're going to open you up.
Congratulations, Douglas, on your amazing book. I just, as Elizabeth says, I'm going to read it again and again. I was interested in Catherine. I was interested in a lot of people, but I thought another author writing that story, especially from fiction, would have put Catherine in the role of a sort of a substitute mother, made her a bit of a victim of her mother's alcoholism. So I was wondering, did you purposely write her out of the story, or maybe she is actually based on your own sister? I don't know. So just was interested in that.
Yeah, thank you, Mags. That's a great question. You're actually the first person ever to ask me about Catherine, so for that I appreciate that. But the character of Catherine does two things for me. It does a lot of things for me. I do have my own sister, and my own sister and Catherine are very divergent. My sister would kill me if I said otherwise. But Catherine, in a way, it is true that in the 80s, when all the industry fled Glasgow, the only way that a lot of young people could get jobs was actually being forcefully immigrated to South Africa. And, you know, that's quite a horrific thing when a first world country can't employ its own people. And so mothers and, you know, fathers and sons have to go overseas, quite far overseas. And so that Catherine's character allowed me to make comment on that. But Catherine also is the first instance we see in the book of people turning away from Agnes. And the theme of the book is really the isolation that Agnes's addiction brings. And what you're looking at over the whole book is how long will Shuggie go to save the person he loves the most before he kind of has to save himself. And so Catherine is the first instance of that. But also there's no blame associated to Catherine, because that is really what addiction does, I think. I think people love the people as far as they can go, but at a certain point you start to get pulled into the quagmire yourself, and you can't find any peace and you can't move on with your life. And so Catherine did the necessary thing to sort of free herself and took herself away, but she is entirely fictitious. My sister would kill me if I said otherwise.
Awesome, thank you. We have two more questions. Jody Feiss or Fiss, I am going to unmute you.
Elizabeth, thank you for recommending this book. It was so good. Douglas, congratulations on your nomination. You deserve all the praise. Oh my goodness. I was floored by this book. It is so good. I'm recommending it to everyone. I have so enjoyed listening to you read excerpts from the book today, and I would love to know if perhaps you might do an entire reading and audiobook of it. I would love my husband to listen to the book. I could listen to you speak all day.
Thank you, Jody. I could speak to you every Sunday if you just want to say nice things to me. I love that. I'm available to get with you guys every Sunday. I've had such a wonderful afternoon. Thank you. There is actually a really great audiobook version of the book, and I got to choose the actor. There's so many characters' voices that I think it takes a character actor to be able to do it and to hit all the nuances of it. And Angus King is his name, actually won some really big awards for some other books, and hopefully will for Shuggie. But I think he's done a beautiful job. And so if that's a way for your husband to listen to it, that would be awesome.
Well, I would love to listen and read at the same time. It took me away. It was beautiful. And I loved hearing you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you, thank you.
Thanks, Jody. All right, we have one more question. And of course, Elizabeth, this might have inspired you to ask more questions, but we have one more question from Becky Garceau. Hi, Becky.
Hi. This is awesome to be picked. My question is kind of along the lines of your authors who have inspired you and who've stayed with you. And well, of course, Elizabeth Berg inspires me. Not that I've written anything, but I'm just really curious to talk to other authors who, what stays with them.
Yeah, I thank you for that question, Becky. I was thinking when I answered Ron earlier that I'd left some of my favorite authors out, but if you're looking actually for some incredible Scottish authors, Janice Galloway is a great choice. She wrote a book called The Trick is to Keep Breathing that was a huge influence on me as a young man. It's about a woman who is also disintegrating. And in a lot of ways, Janice gave me the courage to commit fully to the character of Agnes. And so she is fantastic. And then there is another book called Scabby Queen, which is newly published by Kristen Innes, which is a beautiful book. And then I'm most excited about a book called Bass Rock, which is by a female author called Evie Wilde. But I say these things because actually, I think because I'm talking about an industrial landscape, I often talk about men. Actually, Scottish women writers have it down. They're the ones you should really be reading. They're just phenomenal.
Oh, that's awesome. Okay, Elizabeth, Douglas, do either of you have any more questions for each other? Any last comments?
Douglas, I saw your interview when you recommended those books, and I got very excited about all of them. And I wonder if there's a place where you could post those books. Do you have a Facebook or somewhere where people could go to see the titles and a brief synopsis?
That's a wonderful idea, yes. I don't actually use Facebook, but I am on Twitter and I am on Instagram. And I can do it on both of those places. That would be my pleasure.
I'm so overwhelmed. I'm so thankful. This is the kind of thing that just lifts me right out of what we're going through, the value of books and really, really fine writing. That's why I started Writing Matters in the first place. Writing matters. It's not just a story, it's the execution of the story and the language. And you'll never find a better example than Shuggie Bain. So enjoy it and buy 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 it for all your friends and also for Christmas and Mother's Day.
Please do. And
from your local bookstore.
Yes.
And books ship very well. They ship very easily.
Thank you.
Thank you, Douglas and Elizabeth, so much. We're going to say goodbye to you. And thank you so much. Bill, did you want to thank Douglas real quick?
Well, yes, thank you very much. And thank you, Erin. And just to tell you that I'm really excited to be part of this collaboration. And we're up and going with a large audience. And thank you all for spending an hour with us on Sunday afternoon.
Next time.
Oh, yes. And then for the next, first of all, I'd like to just give a plug for the Book Table, our local bookstore in Oak Park. It's thebooktable.net if you want to order Douglas's book, and also Elizabeth's book. Elizabeth has a number of books, and the new memoir, I'll Be Seeing You About Her Parents, will be out at the end of October. The next event in this place and time will be on Sunday, September 13th with Rick Bragg, journalist and memoirist whose latest book, The Best Cook in the World, about his mother, defies categorization. It's so much more than a memoir or a cookbook, and I hope you can join us then. Thank you.
Yeah, and if you want to have this program keep going, you can always give us a donation. We are all nonprofits here. And you can go to our website, 19thcentury.org, to learn more about this program, our upcoming programs, and to make a donation. Thank you guys so much. You are all so wonderful. Bill Young and Elizabeth Berg from Writing Matters, and of course, Elizabeth Berg from 30 years of wonderful writing and touching all of our hearts. And Douglas Stuart, who is on his first year of hopefully 30 years of amazing writing. Thank you all so much. You all have a wonderful day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.